getting America back on track. Bill Martinez, live.
Let me tell you, it's doable, but it's something that we all have to be in for and in on. You know what I mean? All hands on deck, as the president has declared that we find ourselves on a war footing, as we were talking with our previous guest, Andrew Milburn. And I appreciate the retired Marine Colonel to come on the show to talk about his new book. And, what we can learn regarding leadership and followership. And that is required if we're going to get this country back on track, especially in the midst of this crisis. Well, the Chinese government initially tried to conceal the severity of the coronavirus by hiding facts about the outbreak, which in turn contributed to the spread of the virus across the world. But the state machinery didn't swing into action until January the 23rd. Are you aware of that? Well, the Honorable Prime Minister of East Turkistan Government in Exile is here to tell us more about it. Prime Minister Hudayar, welcome to the show. Always good to be talking to you. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing good. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. I'm prayerful. I got to tell you, Sully, that I'm prayerful that the American people and the people at large will do the right thing. We've got growing examples of that. But like in any war, it's up to the people to follow the right leader and the right leadership principles, regardless of the punditry and the opinion that's flying around so loosely to the injury of its constituents.
I totally agree. I mean, the current, the U.S. government has been very actively trying to push back against this coronavirus. I think President Trump is doing a great job in leading this. But China needs to be held accountable because, as you mentioned earlier, China is responsible for this. The virus originated in China. They actually, I was reading some reports that it was actually manufactured in a warfare lab that China had in Wuhan.
Right.
And they hid all this information from us and let it spread to the world.
Well, and also you got to bring France into play because it was the health minister of France whose husband built that lab in 2003. Were you aware of that?
I actually read a little bit about that too. And, why I don't understand why Western governments, why we are helping China, in any way. I mean, we're giving them a lot of technology, hoping that it'll boost their economy and they'll liberalize. But the Chinese, Communist Party, it's never going to liberalize. I mean, it's just going to get more and more ruthless day by day. And we're seeing this.
Well, and you've been reporting on this, and we've had you on earlier and talking about the Uyghur internment camps that we're at risk of the highest death toll, according to the WHO, that they've declared since COVID-19.
Yes, according to, the latest reports on COVID-19, I mean, the death rates in East Turkistan is the highest among all, the second highest among all provinces and regions under China's control.
Now, this East Turkistan area that we're talking about is known in the parlance of the Chinese as Xinjiang, right?
Yes, yes. Meaning the new territory.
Right, exactly. And so you, as the Prime Minister in exile of East Turkistan, and the government there in exile, is fighting for sovereignty for the Uyghurs and the people that comprise that area that China wants to take over. Exactly.
I mean, China has taken over. China invaded and occupied East Turkestan in December 1949. Since then, we have been, constantly struggling to regain our independence.
And so since 1949, you've been fighting for your independence, but China being what China is, they're not going to let go. I mean, so what is finally going to, is it just going to be pressure from the international community upon them, especially in light of what they're what they've been accused of. I mean, they are responsible for this pandemic. And I had tweeted out earlier that, we need to send China the bill. I mean, I don't care about these political correct activists that say, oh, it's racist. No, it's the truth. It's reality. It's not racism. We know that the virus started there in Wuhan, China. Now, to what degree and what all is behind it, I think that's yet to be determined. Some have offered that maybe Kim Jong-un was fulfilling his promise, in joint venture with the Chinese. If you remember, it was, I believe, in November that he said he put out there in the airways that he had a Christmas present for Donald Trump.
Yes, I hope to God that's not the case, but, we can't rule that out. In between 2017 and 2016 and 2017, the Chinese government, they collected the DNA samples of over 36 million people in East Turkestan, and we were all trying to figure out why they were doing that.
So did you come to a conclusion?
I mean, due to the rapid rate of, other than coronavirus, tuberculosis and other diseases have rapidly increased amongst our population in East Turkestan. There's the rapid, growing state-sponsored organ harvesting. So we think it might be, that China is engaging in biological warfare or using these DNA samples to select, organs for its market.
This is amazing to me because we speak of this almost like here in America. I mean, we've become so numb that we think if people want to sell baby parts, that somehow that is acceptable. But, where is the international community? Why are they not in outrage against the Chinese government for the harvesting of organs and the whole process that goes through? People hear about this, and it's almost like it just goes thunk against a hard head that refuses to accept the reality of how diabolical the Chinese are. They could care less about their people. They're only thinking about their ideology and their desire to rule the world. End of story. And how they get there, so what?
Exactly. I mean, the Chinese government has largely manipulated the international community, especially the United Nations and even the World Health Organization. Originally, the World Health Organization was, refused to even criticize China for its handling of this crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, up until February, I think the first week of February, they were still offering cover for the Chinese. And God only knows, I mean, they're probably complicit in this propaganda campaign that's been emanated to even suggest that somehow the U.S. military was responsible for the release of this virus.
I mean, that's completely ridiculous. I mean, what's the U.S. military doing in China? How would the U.S. military be in China without starting a war? Mm-hmm. Like, that's something that people, it's like the logical mind, someone should ask this question,
Yeah. Could you imagine, I mean, if the Chinese really believed that the U.S. military released this virus, which the President of the United States has called it an invisible enemy and put us on a war footing, could you imagine the Chinese just sitting there and just shrugging like Atlas or something? I mean, come on, you got to be kidding me.
Exactly. No, it would definitely start a war. And obviously the Chinese government, it doesn't want to take responsibilities for its actions. So, historically, they've always blamed the United States or the West for any problem that arises.
Well, we'll have to see, Prime Minister, if the world has the intestinal fortitude to really call the Chinese for what they have done, because they're responsible for all these deaths. We've got, over 250,000 infections. Over 353,000 people have been infected by this virus. It is unbelievable the impact that this has had. Over 15,000 deaths. And I believe the responsibility has to lie where the responsibility belongs, whether you want to be politically correct or not, because The truth is something that is undeniable. More from the Prime Minister after this. Stay with us.
You're listening to Bill Martinez Live. Your program, your calls, your opinions. Bill Martinez Live.
Let me give it to you straight. If ever there was a time that we needed to understand and appreciate who holds our head up, it is now, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, we're going to hold on to the things of this world. And as we mentioned earlier, God is shaking things up. This is what is going on. This is a great shaking up that is happening that is not relegated to an area. My original thought about this several weeks ago, because they were only talking about it, attacking, this virus attacking older people. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem that would necessarily be godlike. I think it was kind of odd. But then as we saw it playing out, we're realizing that this is impacting all people of all ages across the universe here. So when you consider that, you say, okay, number one, I know that God is sovereign. Number two, things are being shaken up. And as Dr. Tony Evans said, it's what you hold on to. If you're holding on to the things of the world that are being shaken, if you're down at the earth in the middle of the earthquake, you're going to feel the vibration, you're going to feel the shaking and the uncertainty, right? But if you're above it, if you're 30,000 feet in the air and you're not feeling the shaking, and the metaphor being that if you're above it and you are following God's lead and you're in alignment with what God's doing, the shaking is not going to affect you as much as it will somebody who's at the ground level. Does that make sense? Okay, so I pass that on to you for a bit of encouragement right now, that we keep our eyes on the things that are above right now as we are, on this war footing where the enemy, invisible as it is no longer existential. It is living amongst us. It is killing our own citizens. And the Prime Minister, who is with us right now, Salih, the Prime Minister of East Turkistan Government in Exile, Salih Hudayar, knows firsthand. Salih, we mentioned earlier that the organ harvesting that China does with impunity, and we hear reports of this, but it's like the world is asleep, and we're allowing another version of Adolf Hitler coming in and destroying people's lives, for its own personal agenda, and nobody is saying anything about this.
Unfortunately, the international community, they're very well aware this is happening. There has been numerous reports. In fact, more recently, the China Tribunal found that this is continuing, as we speak, that more recently, they're harvesting the organs of Uyghur and other Turkic political prisoners in East Turkestan that were locked up in these concentration camps.
They're locked up in these concentration camps, and in some cases they kind of give it a politically correct name. These are reprogramming or re-education camps is what they're calling them, right?
Yes. The Chinese government calls it vocational training and re-education camps.
So it's all in the eye of the beholder, but we know what's happening. I mean, case in point, we don't have to do a deep dive here. You can see the fruit of their decisions as to what's taken place. I mean, look at the doctor, 34-year-old doctor who raised the alarm and said, we got a problem here. This thing's out of control. We cannot contain this. And so he makes it known, and in a matter of weeks, somehow he contracts the virus, and he's gone, along with, I believe, 3 other doctors. And there's also a recent report of a prominent businessman, very wealthy, who had an active social media, as much as you could have an active social media operation in China because they're closing down everything. Everything is so scrutinized. But anyway, I guess he crossed the line more than once, and suddenly he's disappeared. His family, everybody has no idea where he's at. And so we can only imagine what the Chinese government must have done to him.
Yes, I mean, anyone that the Chinese government deems a threat, they arrest, they detain, and most often you don't hear about them after that. Sometimes if there's a lot of international, condemnation, the Chinese government will release a fake, a forced confession video in which they confess to their, these made-up charges.
Mm-hmm. Well, Prime Minister, for the Uyghurs in East Turkistan, here they are, and as you and I were talking, they're 2,000 miles away from China, but yet the arms and the control of China has surrounded that community since 1949, correct?
Yes.
And go ahead.
Continue, please.
Well, I just wanted to get your perspective on how you continue to battle this fight and to keep the Uyghur plight in front. We appreciate you coming on the air with us. You've been very faithful to do this, to make sure that the word continues to get out to everyday Americans. This is a radio show that is not only heard in America, but around the world. So other people around the world are hearing of the plight of the Uyghurs and the overreach and the aggressiveness of the Chinese government. This is by no means some benign, genteel governmental force. I mean, they, regardless of what they want us to believe, we are seeing clearly by their actions that this is not a friendly agent to the international community at large, is it?
No, since its founding, the Chinese Communist Party, and since, it occupied East Turkestan, I mean, they've been engaging in colonization and genocide. As we speak, they're forcibly transferring tens, if not hundreds of thousands of young Uyghur and other Turkic men and women into, Chinese provinces that have been really hit hard with the coronavirus, to have them work as, slave labor in these provinces, while at the same time they're transferring tens of thousands of Chinese settlers and giving them, lucrative incentives such as free land, free housing, high pay salary, free insurance, and a state pension so that they can continue to colonize East Turkestan.
Mm-hmm. And basically, they want their people with their thoughts and their ideas and their conditioning to come in and homogenize, if I can say, the culture of East Turkestan and the Uyghurs.
Exactly. I mean, they've, tried to assimilate us. I mean, they've been trying to assimilate us since 1949, and it hasn't been so successful. So they built these, concentration camps starting around 2016. And according to the U.S. Department of Defense, they put up 3 million Uyghur, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples into these concentration camps. And these camps are not built, it's not something temporary. The fact that they're, steel and concrete structures show that it's long-term. And many people are dying in these camps, be it from torture, be it from forced starvation or forced medication, organ harvesting, rape, and, the spread of diseases.
Exactly. Salih, what gives the Uyghurs hope?
Well, what gives us hope is the fact that, we believe in God. We believe that God is just, and that as long as we continue to, resist, and as long as we do our basic duties of informing the world, informing those around us, that God will send us help.
And that God would send someone to open up these gates, these prison gates, and set the people free. We said earlier that the light is the greatest disinfectant, whether it has to do with the coronavirus, human abuse that is taking place, there in East Turkistan. And the light of the world has come. I mean, here it is. We are going into this is the fourth week of Lent, of the Lenten season. It is a time of rejoicing, we're told. Mahdi Sunday was yesterday. And it's a time to rejoice. And not only are we told to rejoice, but keep rejoicing. And I believe that for the Uyghurs and the people of faith there in East Turkistan, I mean, their faith has been something that is so extraordinary. And I just want to join with you, Prime Minister, in your prayers that we could be in agreement that the light of the world, that Jesus Christ, who came to set the captives free, would shine through not only on the coronavirus, but on this hideous communist oppression that is taking place in East Turkistan. God wants you to be free. I believe that to be the case, and that this would be fully realized, but it will be by the prayers of not only those, the Uyghurs in East Turkistan and the Turks, they're affected, but for the international community to come together and to finally realize that the true light of the world is who we're here to serve.
Amen. Exactly. I mean, we have to, pray to God. We have to join hands together, because it's not only, the Chinese Communist Party is not only targeting Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims, they're also targeting Christian populations, Buddhists. Any religion is a threat to, the atheist Communist Party.
Exactly.
So we have to push back against this as a united world.
Well, we have to leave it there. Salih Hudayr, the Prime Minister of East Turkistan Government in Exile, has been our guest. Salih, Godspeed, and God's peace be with you. Take care.
Thank you. God bless.